All right, so this is a relatively simple tip. The initial question in the community was, the person was putting characters all over the course and on the screens, and then wanted to know, like, how do I know? How do I make sure these characters are all consistently sized? And so we'll look at a couple of ideas, and it's not even really about characters, but sometimes you may be working with objects, and then it's easy enough to go like on a screen, do something, copy it, and then go back to the other screen and paste it. But we'll look at a few different ideas if you're working with other objects as well. So the genesis of the question, the main part was working with the photographic characters. And so when we work with photographic characters, and you'll see this here in a second, and you work with them in states, or even if you're like changing the pose of the character on the screen, sometimes that character shifts, and or you may resize it, so you want to make sure the character is in the right sizing. So we're going to end up using the drawing guides for that. And so the way you get that, you see there's a little screen shot here, but you're just going to right click, and then you have your grids and guides right here. And then when you open that up, you can see here there's display drawing guides on screen. Hit OK. What happened was I actually deleted all my guides so you wouldn't see them. So we'll look at how to put the guides on there. So the first thing you want to do is right click, and then do grids and guides, and then do display drawing guides. Now, in my case, I delete them. Normally, you'd end up seeing some guides show up on the screen. What we're going to do is we're going to add our own guides. So we're going to work with a character. So this is a common issue, and why these guides work in handy. So like if I have this character here, and I have different states of the character, you'll notice the character looks like it's shifting, right? So if I'm doing triggers and going from one state to the next, I don't want the character to look like the character sliding around on the screen. So why is the character shifting? So the first thing we'll notice is there's a bounding box, right, for the characters. And these photographic characters are all aligned to the top bounding box. And you'll notice that if you come into edit shapes or edit the states here, and then you move this out of the way. Oops. Hold on a second. I actually need to edit the states. Now I moved my character. We should do something on moving characters. Okay, so if I come in here, I'm going to edit my states here. Now, when I move the character, you can see there's a little, I don't know how well it shows up in the webinar, but there's like a little registration point here, and that's kind of the top left corner. Right, so all of the images that you insert in there are going to be on the top left corner, right? So what happens is some of these images are wider, like this particular one, the bounding box is wider because the character's arm sticks out, and here the bounding box is even wider than that because of the sign, right? So what do I do to keep these characters from moving around? This is where the drawing guides come in handy. I usually use the head as the basis for this. And so what I'm going to do is on the first character here, I'm going to right click, and I got rid of my guides, so I'm going to show you how to add guides, but normally you just drag the guide. So I'm going to right click, and you'll see when I right click, I can add a horizontal or vertical guide. I'm going to add a horizontal guide. Oops. I don't know what happened here. Maybe I need to, let me get out of the states. I can't do it inside the state. So I'm going to right click. I'm going to add a horizontal guide. And oops, there's the guide I added. So the first thing I do is I line it to the eyes. Let me get that going here. So I line it up to the eyes, and then I'll add a vertical guide. And I'll take that and I'll align it to the nose, right? And then so I got it lined up to the nose. Unfortunately, I'm going to delete this box so it doesn't keep popping up here. All right, so I've got it, the guide lined up to the eyes. I've got the guide lined up to the nose. It moved on me when I deleted that box. All right, so it's close enough. It doesn't have to be perfect. The other thing is I'll align it to the top and bottom of the head, or maybe the sides of the head. And that just kind of gives me a framework, so that when I'm moving an object or resizing it, I know it's kind of around the same size. So I might do something like that where I'll do a horizontal guide. I don't need to do the whole head, but I kind of got the top of the head. And I'll take this one I already created and we'll do it. So now I kind of can see, okay, this is where the eye is. This is the top of the head, bottom of the head, right? So now when I go into another character, let's zoom out a little bit. So if I come to edit these states, see now I can see, well, this character is way out of alignment, right? So I'm going to nudge her up so the top of her head is there. And then I can just move her. I'm just using the arrow key, but I can just move her. And so now when I go from character to character, it doesn't jump as much. So there's going to be a little bit of movement just because the shape changes, but that little bit of a movement's not a big deal. But when you do something like this, you have this big jump cut, right? So then that's an easy way to make sure that your characters are aligned. Or if you ended up, let's say you were playing around, you accidentally did something like this. Well, you get that registration point, right, which is irrelevant, but I can move the character. I can say, okay, I can align the character and resize it quickly because I've got these guides to say, okay, I know where the top of the head is, I know where the bottom of the head is, and then I'm just going to resize the character. And it's a lot easier to do that. And then I've got this middle alignment for the nose, and that kind of helps keep those things lined up. One other thing about resizing objects, like the characters, if I just drag them from the corners, they scale. I see this quite a bit. People squeeze them. That's great if you want the character to look thinner or heavier, but the way you really want to do it is you want to scale it from the corners, and that keeps it in the right perspective, right, or aspect ratio, so you're not stretching or skewing the image. That's kind of one of those things. For me, it's personally like a pet peeve. I see it all the time in people's projects. I do it myself. Sometimes I just want to nudge something real quick instead of resizing, so I just barely move it. But if you're skewing it or something like that, you don't want to do that. So if you drag from the corners, that'll prevent that. A bonus tip in there, if you have objects, I'll just throw this in there since we're talking about scaling. If I hold the shift key down and I have a square or draw a rectangle, it's going to draw a perfect square. If I drag this from the corner, it's not going to scale, right? If I hold the shift key down and drag, the shapes will maintain their aspect ratio. And so they'll scale, but you're not going to, alter or make them skinnier or taller or anything like that. So extra tip in there. So that's one way to keep things aligned or resize them, is just use the drawing guides. And that's a way you can kind of set things up. You can use those to align anything on the screen, shapes, pictures, whatever you want to do. But I use that quite a bit when I'm working with photographic characters. And I think that was what the person was asking in the community, is they were putting these characters on the screen and then they had no way to know if they were the right size. Now, this way it works fine because the characters are all static, right? Because I'm using states. And so I know the character is always going to be in the same space. But what if I have the character over here? Then, do I have to then move the character and then bring it over, right? So the drawing guides may not be the right option for you, because at that point, it doesn't have to be perfectly aligned. It needs to be somewhat similar. And this is where I would maybe use a layout. So what I did, and we'll actually use a car. I'm going to right click and then get rid of those guides. So you can see I've got the guides on there. I don't want them right now. So I'm going to turn off the guides here, hit OK, and now they're off the screen. So this here is a more common use of this. What we're going to talk about is when you're working with non-character images. So let's say I insert a car, right? So I've got a car. We'll do car illustration. This is, I think, what I was using. So let's say I've got this car here, right? And then I've got to size this car. So I got this car, and maybe I'm doing a series of slides with different cars or objects that should be similar size. And if I go and insert another illustration of a car, we'll do one. This is similar aspect ratio or similar perspective, right? So this car is not, the boxes are not the same size. So I can't say, well, these are all, 400 by 200 images, right? Because they're not all going to be the same size. So how do I get these images aligned as I'm going through the thing and I'm dropping different images on the screen? Well, one way to do that is to build a layout. And so we're going to do this. We'll duplicate the screen. So let's say I came on here. I've got to put this black car in here. And this one, I've got the blue one. We'll do one more. And then I've got this one we're going to delete here. Let's go ahead and insert another car. And we'll just do this one here. So we've got another car. So we've got these cars are all kind of the same perspective. So the question is like, how do I get them all sized up the same quickly so I don't have to go back and forth to all the screens? I could do drawing guides, but one of the challenges with the drawing guides is that these bounding boxes are a little bit different. So the images aren't exactly the same. And the drawing guides I don't need to be quite as exact because I'm jumping from slide to slide. So what I would do is actually make a layout. So if I go into Slide Master, here you go to View, then you go to Slide Master. You can create a layout. I do this a lot in courses when I have objects and I want to make sure the sizing or things are the same. So in this case, you can see I created what would be my preferred size for a car in that perspective. So if I have objects that I know need to be similar sizes, or they need to be aligned at a certain point on the screen, I'll just create a layout. So maybe all my bodies need to be here, or if I have a bigger character, the face needs to be this size approximately, right? Doesn't have to be exact. So I can create these layout templates, and then what I need to do is just when I'm working on a slide, I just say, okay, I'm going to go ahead and change the layout, and now I can take this object and kind of approximately resize it and say, okay, that looks pretty close. And then I know where it needs to be on the screen, and then I'm just going to go ahead and go back to my normal layout, and it's set up there. And I would do the same thing here. So using the layouts to kind of create some sort of templating, right, and organize your content on the screen, and making sure that there's some alignment. Maybe I want to twist that a little bit. I don't know. That looks like it's about to tip over. And I'm just going to go back and change it. So the layouts help with that. Same thing if you're working with characters. Let's say we'll get rid of this one here. Let's say I insert a character, and I know the character needs to be in a certain point. Let's change the pose of this character. So she needs to be in a certain place on the slide, right? I can just go to my layout here, and then I'll apply the layout and say, okay, I know that character needs to be here on the slide in this area, and this is about the height, whatever size that she needs to be. Or if I need to scale it up, all my characters, their faces, they need to be a certain size, right? So maybe this is okay. This is close enough. So now I know when I put new characters on the screen, they're all generally about the same size. So a couple of simple ideas. One is using the guides, and you can be very specific with the guides and how you frame those up, right? Because you can box things in. And then the other thing is just creating layouts that have the alignment and different things on them. And then you can just change to the layout, move things around, and then change back to the layout that you're actually using for that particular slide. Nothing super fancy, some quick tips for when you need those types of things. Hopefully you learned something in that process. I'm going to go ahead and hand that off to Ginger. And then I would say, if you ever have questions, make sure you do leverage the community, because this is where a lot of our quick tips come from. And a lot of what I like most about the quick tips is that you kind of learn some of the nuance of production, right? Like this tip in particular may not be that interesting or useful to you, but knowing that you can modify the layouts and you swap layouts like that, or knowing that you have the drawing guides, that's kind of the benefit of these quick tip sessions. So hopefully you got something out of it.